Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining the 10-minute Bible lesson. We appreciate you joining us today. Our studies we've been doing a series of studies from the book of Matthew, and it's about Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. That includes chapters 5, 6, and 7. We're in chapter 5, and we've come all the way down to a place in chapter 5 where Jesus is giving his thoughts about God's law. Now, God's law is important. And so Jesus is going to give us his thoughts and his opinions about it. And I believe that last time we said that Jesus said this about the law. He said that not even the smallest jot or tittle would be taken away from the law until all of it is fulfilled. And so sometimes people are saying, well, the law, God's law is not applicable anymore. But that's not what Jesus said. He says it'll be there until heaven and earth passes away, and not even a jot or a tittle will pass away. Now, in our lessons that we've had and the lessons that we're going to be having, what we're going to be talking about is how Jesus kind of takes one of the parts of the law. In fact, today we're going to be reading where he takes commandment number 6. And what he does is he reads that, or he comments on that, and then he gives a deeper meaning about that commandment. And let's go ahead and look at it and read it. Now, there's two verses here. This is all of our verses today, and it's in Matthew chapter 5 and verses 21 and 22. And here's what Jesus said. He says, "You have heard that it was said to those of old, 'You shall not murder.'" Now, that is to say, that's God's commandments, and they've been around a long, long time. Listen, they had been around a long, long time, even when Jesus walked the earth. And he says, you've heard that it was said in the old time, you shall not murder. And whoever murders will be in danger of the judgment. And in the next verse, Jesus said this, "But I say to you." Now that caught my attention, because at least I'm thinking that when Jesus said, "But I say to you," I'm thinking that Jesus is putting himself on the same authority as God is. And why not? Because Jesus was and is God in the flesh. And he has the right to say what the law is. So he mentions the law, and that law was written by the finger of God on tablets of stone. And Jesus says this, he says, it was written there, and said to those of old. He says, "But I say to you." Now that's got my attention because I want to know what Jesus has to say, and here's what he has to say. He says, "But I say to you that whoever is angry with his brother without a cause shall be in danger of the judgment. And whoever says to his brother, 'Raca,' shall be in danger of the council. But whoever says, 'You fool,' shall be in danger of hell fire." Now the law stated that we should not commit murder. Hey, that's a good law, isn't it? I'd like to say that everybody's going to obey that law, but the fact of the matter is that they don't. Listen, there's people that are killed every single day. I don't know how many, but across the world, just think of how many people are murdered every day, and they're breaking God's law. Now, you might think this. There's two things that we might think about this, and I think that we may have a misunderstanding. Number one is, since there's so many breaking God's law, we think, well, God is kind of slack in somehow enforcing his commandments, and that wouldn't be true. So God will enforce all of his commandments. That is to say, he will judge everyone that's broken the law. Now then, there is a way out in some way, and that is that we can receive mercy and grace through Jesus Christ. But I want you to understand that God is not slack about his judgment about people breaking the law. And here's another thing that I think that we probably have a misconception about. So when we're looking at the law, we'll look at the list, and on the list, one of them says, "You shall not murder." And we go, "Oh, that's a great law, and I'm certainly obeying that law." And I'm obeying it because I've never murdered anyone. And so if I look at a list of the law, I can just take that one and I can make a check on it, and say, you know what, that one I'm doing. That one I'm not doing. I'm not murdering anyone. But I would just like to say this, that it might make us feel pretty good about ourselves. But could I just say this, actually, are we really not breaking that law? Now that's the very heart of the point that I want to talk about in our Bible study lesson. So Jesus is telling us about the law, and it's God's law, but he's saying it's not just what we do. That is to say, it's not just the actual act of it. So we may be innocent in the actual act, but Jesus is going to talk to us about this. He's going to talk about this, about it's important about what we think. And not only what we think, but how we feel inside. That is to say, what's going on inside our hearts. Now, that's why Jesus said this, that that a person is in danger of the judgment when he is angry with his brother. Of course, somebody wants to ask the question, well, who's our brother? And it's just my opinion. I really don't think Jesus is talking about our biological brothers. I think he's talking about the brotherhood of man. I just think that he's talking about, it could be our fellow man. So he's saying that if we're angry with our brother, that will cause us to be in danger of the judgment. Now, I really like what William Barclay said in his commentary about this verse. Let me just read some of it. He said there's two types of anger. He said there's an anger which quickly blazes up and which just as quickly dies down. And I think all of us have had that. We've all experienced that. But then he goes on to say this. He says there's another kind of anger, and this anger is that anger which is a long-lived anger. In fact, he says it's the anger of the man who nurses wrath and keeps it warm. It is the anger over which a person broods and which he will not allow to die. Now, William Barclay says that this is the anger that is liable for judgment. And I just thought that was interesting. Now, Jesus goes on to say, after he says that, you can be angry in your heart and you can be guilty of breaking that commandment. But he goes on to say this. He says, and if a person is to say to his brother, Raka, that's not a word we hear a whole lot about. It's an Arab word. And it's not a nice word. That is to say, it has, according to Barclay, again, I'll reference him again, he says it means a brainless idiot. Or it could mean a silly fool, or someone who is an empty-headed blunderer, or a worthless person. Have you ever called anybody an idiot? Well, I'm sure, I know that I have. Have we ever said somebody that their head was empty or they were worthless? Well, listen, this is what Jesus said. Jesus says this, if anybody says that to his brother, then he will be in danger of the council. Now, Barclay goes on to say about this word that this word is almost untranslatable. And the reason he says that is because it describes the tone of a voice more than anything else. So sometimes we can say things with the tone of our voice that can be mean and hateful. And I'm sure that you know what I'm talking about. It can be an accent or an accent of contempt. So the person who says this to Jesus is in danger of the council. Now there's one other thing that Jesus says here. And he says this, and it seems like each one is a little worse. He says this, he said to call someone a fool is even worse. Because if we call someone a fool, Jesus says that we're in danger of hell fire. Now you have to ask yourself, because there's a lot of people believe in heaven, but they like to believe that there's no hell. But listen, Jesus said there was a hell. In fact, he said it was hell fire. It's a place of torment. And Jesus said this, that if we call somebody a fool, then we're in danger of hellfire. Now that's pretty serious, I would say. Now remember, in the Old Testament, in the book of Psalms, it says the fool has said in his heart that there is no God. So what we're doing, and I think maybe what Jesus is saying, is when we call someone a moral fool, and that's a horrible thing to say. And it's just something that I'm not. I've always been cautious, even before I was a Christian, of calling somebody a fool. I remember my mom said, "Don't ever say that. Don't ever say that," and she had good reason to say that because that's what Jesus said. So anyway, this is what Jesus says here. So what could be worse than calling someone a moral fool? I don't know. These are really strong words by Jesus, aren't they? Strong words by the Savior. So keeping God's moral law is more than just keeping it on the outside. And sometimes that's the way we are. We think we kind of like want to skirt around things and say, you know what, I did that. But I think Jesus is saying, no, there's a little more to it. And it has to do with what we're feeling inside our hearts and inside our beings, because that's where the actual acts come from. Generally and usually they come from something that's going on the inside. Hey, I love it when Jesus said this. He says, it's been said of those that old, you shall not commit murder. He says, but I say to you. And don't you love it when Jesus expounds on the law and just digs deeper down in there and gets at meaning? Hey, listen, we appreciate you joining us today. And we're going to be today we looked at the sixth commandment that Jesus said. And next time we're going to be looking at the seventh commandment. So have a good week.